Hello, everyone, and welcome to migrating from WordPress to Drupal 8 session. Today we have two speakers, Jacqueline and Hawkeye. So you're going to walk you through the session today. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them at the end of the session. And please make sure you're on the session tab, and so that you'll be able to ask questions, and so that we'll know the amount of people on the session. So thank you, and on to you guys.
Great, thank you, Henry. All right, welcome. This presentation is on migrating from WordPress to Drupal 8. It's based on a case study of a client, and I'm calling this do-it-yourself process plugins. Now, first, we're going to introduce ourselves. So I am Jackie Tenderwolf. I'm a junior Drupal developer with interpersonal frequency. That's ifsite.com. So we're a full-service Drupal agency. We serve municipal government sites like libraries, cities, counties, utilities. We're always looking for talented developers and project managers, and right now we're looking for a senior Drupal architect and a backend developer, among other positions. You can go to ifsite.com/join-our-team. Oh, and Hawkeye's here too. Oh, Hawkeye and I are together in life. We are life partners. We don't work together by design.
That is true, yes. We are life partners, and I work at Lullabot, and I'm a backend developer, and I sometimes support Jackie on some of the new things that she's learning. So in this case, I wrote a few small pieces of the migration. And at Lullabot, we are also hiring. So you can go to /jobs and look at our positions for content designer and an administrative/human resources assistant. Thank you.
So before we start on the presentation, I did want to give a shout out to DrupalEasy.com. I took that course. It was almost 2 years ago, and as soon as I finished that course, I got my first Drupal job, and now I'm working full-time as a Drupal developer. And so I just want to give them a shout out, because without that foundational coursework, I couldn't have started. And then I also wanted to give a shout out to the Understanding Drupal Migrations course, which is a 3-part in-depth course that I took that it really helped me with learning migrations. And lastly, the builders of the WordPress migrate module, which we used that and the UI wizard to start our project. Okay, so a little bit about the case study. So the assignment was to migrate from WordPress into an existing Drupal 8 site. The client, we had been managing and hosting their site for years. They're a metropolitan water utility company, and their public relations department had started an online blog style digital magazine produced by creative people. And so the focus was articles and storytelling, which included photography and infographics and videos and texts, mostly using a WYSIWYG editor. And we wanted to migrate the author pages, which were about the contributing authors and photographers, the blog posts, and then all the featured photos and videos into the existing Drupal site. They wanted the sub-site to look and feel different, more flashy or colorful than the main site, which had more business end. So this was like their public relations side. And so why migrate from WordPress? In this case, the most compelling reason was efficiency of maintenance, but security was also a concern. The client was familiar with Drupal and enjoyed its power. And there was also the consistency of the branding message. Even though the sub-site looked slightly different from the main site, there were enough elements of color and theming and components to create a more consistent overall experience. So I'm assuming a lot of things before we start. today on the meat of the matter, which will be process plugins. I'm assuming that everybody here knows how to install and enable the WordPress migrate module. It would be nice if everyone knew the extract, transform, load process, which is the basics of migrating content. That corresponds to source, process, and destination plugins in Drupal. So basically, you're extracting data from one place, you're transforming it or processing it, and then loading it into a new place. Also, basic knowledge that I had to pick up to do the first migration was YAML syntax, which relies a lot on indentations and spaces rather than other kinds of punctuation and dashes. Okay, so the final thing that I'm assuming everyone would know how to do would be how to navigate to the Tools tab in the WordPress dashboard and use Export All Content to export the data into a .xml file. So in my original outline of this presentation, I had included basic migration concepts and basic YAML syntax and other basic Drupal things, but in the interest
sorry, Jacqueline. Sorry to
yeah.
cut you up. Do you have are you sharing the screen right now? We can only see the migrating from WordPress title. Are you sharing any other screen?
I thought so.
Okay. Yeah, there we go.
You see that now?
Yes.
When we switch slides, do you see them changing now? Okay, it's because we had it full screen on a different thing. So now that it's all together in one place, these were the slides that you missed.
Yeah, so going backwards, the slides you missed. This is about us, interpersonal frequency, and Lullabot. And then my shout outs to Drupal Easy, understanding Drupal / migrations, and the WordPress migrate module. And then this was about the assignment for the Metropolitan Water Utility Company, what we had to do. This is the basic knowledge. So let's see. When I started doing this presentation, I did it as part of a company project. Every week we get a few hours to work on personal projects that are supposed to benefit the company. And I wanted to really grok migrations. And so as I did this migration and afterwards, I documented the process. So all of that information was in the original presentation. In the interest of time, I'm just going to go over process plugins for the most part. So I want to say that that process of documenting with the goal of teaching was really great for me to learn the migration, you know, all the ins and outs of migration. In fact, I'm starting a new migration project in August, again, going from WordPress to Drupal. So while I pulled out most of the slides dealing with basic setup so we could talk about the trickier and more interesting part of process plugins and process plugin chains, I did want to make people aware of a couple of useful patches that I didn't discover until after this first project. We migrated image files into the file entity module using the file entity module. But for future migrations, all of our sites are now using the media module. And so I would want to migrate attachments into media. And thankfully, WordPress Migrate has a patch for that. I don't know if you can see those, but maybe just good enough to know that there are patches for that and that you have to install them in order because one builds on the other. And so the only tip I have here is that the patches build on one another, so you need to install them in order, one at a time. So is everybody still seeing the, if you're not, let me know, but I assume everybody is still following along with run the WordPress Migrate Wizard.
That's it.
Excellent. So the WordPress Migrate module did the heavy lifting. It gave us the boilerplate migration YAMLs, which we then modified to get all the content and metadata we wanted from the WordPress into Drupal. So basically, we just went into structure migrations, clicked on add import from WordPress, and then clicked through the wizard. And then you click finish, and ta-da, you have all your basic YAML files. The YAML files are organized in, so there are several, one for each content type and for attachments. I can't remember all of them. I think there were 5 altogether. But
authors,
tags, categories, right. So there's one migration group YAML that sort of manages them all. And I mentioned this because it was useful for me to find the place to tell it where to find the WordPress.xml file that we had downloaded. And this way, we could work on the migration, and then at the end, there was a content freeze for the WordPress site. I downloaded the file exported the file for the last time, renamed it, saved it in the saved it where I had said, and in the directory I had said, and then committed it to the repo so that we could run the migration in production. Okay, again, what I'm not going to talk about, much about source or destination. We're going to mostly talk about process. So the source section of the YAML is in part supplied by WordPress Migrate. And then as you're sourcing the data, basically you're using XPath queries to target the content you want. You find that XPath queries are similar to CSS selectors, and they help you target a series of elements in the XML. There are plenty of tutorials online about using XPath queries, and it's really the detailed and time-consuming part of finding your sources, combing through, doing those queries to find the exact source types for the data we want to process. And destination plugins are provided by Drupal core, are rarely customized. Here are 2 destination plugin entity node, destination plugin entity file. And we're going to be looking at process plugins that correspond to these 2 destinations in the rest of the presentation. The meat of the matter, process plugins. So this is going to be the posts, the actual blog posts that we moved. So our assignment was to move all articles and stories from the WordPress site, from the blog site over, whether they were published or not. So the WordPress site contained a lot of articles and stories, only some of which were published. We were moving it all, and we were going to use Drupal's content moderation system to distinguish between published and draft content. So the next few process plugin examples are from the star blog post migration YAML, and the WordPress migrate module creates 1 YAML file per content type, which was called star post in the Drupal site. I use the word star a lot in naming content types and fields to keep the digital magazine separate from the business side of the municipal water site. And I did that for content editors and site maintainers' ease of use. And so naming things is not part of this presentation, but I think you could teach a course just on naming things in migrations. Okay, so this is the first one I want to go over, which is just StaticMap. The StaticMap plugin, it processes data according to key value pairs. And this is the pattern of a migration YAML. It starts with a Drupal field, in this case, moderation state. And you can see here that the YAML depends on indentations to distinguish between levels of operation and groups processes together. So moderation state is the name of the Drupal field. It's the destination field. The process plugin is StaticMap, which processes data according to key value pairs and comes from the core migrate API, I believe. But there are even more process plugins available by contrib modules like migrate tools. But I think StaticMap is provided by the core migrate API. In this case, the source from WordPress was the status field. And we made the default value of status in Drupal be draft. But if the status field in WordPress was publish, we mapped it to published in Drupal. So I'm going to do another StaticMap example that we used, but this time in a chain, a process plugin chain. So this time the challenge was that some of the authors had 2 usernames. So when we ran the migration the first time, we had more authors showing up in Drupal than we had in WordPress. And so after digging through the source file, we discovered that several people had used 2 different usernames. And so we wanted to consolidate them into one username per guest author, per author. And while we were at it, any article attributed to the user admin would now be authored by star staff. So here's StaticMap, another example. So we're going into the field star byline. And if you look at the bottom, you'll see the plugin migration lookup coming from the migration star WordPress authors. So what we know about this StaticMap is that we've already run the WordPress authors migration, and this post migration YAML is dependent on that one. So we're going to access the information, the data we need from that star WordPress authors migration. All right. So we're moving data into the field star byline, which is in the star post content type. Bypass true enables the StaticMap plugin to proceed to the migration lookup plugin, even if there's no entry in the map, which means for the majority of users. So then we get to the map itself. If the author was assigned to admin in WordPress, in Drupal, it's star staff. Tracy Ross, all one word, is consolidated to the other way Tracy showed up as a guest author as Tracy-Ross, and so on. So this is an example of a process plugin chain, and it's where you can get creative, and how we got creative in processing the data. So to go over it again, we were looking to fill the field star byline with an author name. As the migration script runs over the data in a row, if it finds one of the sources on the map, then it consolidates the data into one author name. Then it pulls from the author's migration the user ID of the corresponding Drupal user. I did want to just point out that we used, that you can use, we did custom process plugins. So this WordPress video plugin was a custom process plugin. And so these require a pretty solid knowledge base in PHP, which Jackie Tenderwolf does not have yet. So we enter a black box for me, but I wanted to mention that you can write these. In our case, we needed to extract a video URL from serialized WordPress data, because as I mentioned, the site had a lot of videos and images, and featured videos was an important part of the site. So we need the video URL for the next plugin. So we had to extract the URL from the way that WordPress had it stored. So Hawkeye wrote a process plugin to do that. And then we used the Callback plugin, which gave us access to functions within modules, contributed modules to the project, among other things. Callback is pretty powerful, but in this case, we were looking to use it to get the callable YouTube get video ID, which is a function included in the YouTube module. Yeah, and so in that case, what's interesting about this is while we had to write a custom process plugin to source the URL, then we just used a pre-existing function from the YouTube module to finish off the process. Okay, that's all I'm going to talk about for posts. Now I want to talk about how some of the challenges we had when we migrated attachments. Let me find out what they want to see. Okay. Okay, so this was the star WordPress attachments YAML. We're going to get featured images and embedded images. I'm going to go over a few of the challenges we faced and how we handled them. And the very first was how we defined the path and file names for images. Okay, so again, this is for the Callback plugin. So as I mentioned earlier, callbacks can be used for methods which are functions within a class. So that they can be used for global PHP functions, to use pull on functions that exist in other places in the repo, like other modules, like they did with YouTube. And they can be used with functions that live within a class. So callbacks for methods are represented as an array with two keys: the class name, including namespace, and the method name. So in this case, that's the callable. The class name is in Drupal core file system, and the method name is base name. Here we're using the process plugin callback to be able to use the base name method, which just extracts the name of the file from the URL within the class file system found in Drupal core. The WordPress source is called attachment URL. But at the top, what is this destination underscore file? It's not a field in the file entity. We created a variable. Destination underscore file is a, in quotes, variable that we used 2 times as the image file name itself and to build the full path of the destination URL for storage in the Drupal site. So the first time we use the variable destination file is to process the file name. The name of the image file will be the name from the attachment URL field in WordPress that has been transformed by the base name method in Drupal core to be the file name portion of the URL. The image name will be the same in Drupal as it was in WordPress. So the @ symbol, so file name @ destination file, that indicates, the @ indicates that this is information you can find earlier in the YAML, from an earlier process in the YAML. So this is the concat plugin. The second time we use the variable destination file, it's to fill the field destination full path. I wanted here to show how we use the concat plugin. So first of all, we set the constant file dest URI as public star featured images in the very top near source in the YAML. So all the images are going to be stored in the star featured images directory. So the concat plugin takes all the items listed under source and glues them together with a delimiter. In this case, that's the /path separator in our case. Lastly, we then fed the destination full path through the URL encode plugin, which before downloading the file from the source to Drupal will escape any special characters in the file name, so that the URL is correctly interpreted by the browser. All right, this is the final challenge for today, alt text. In our case study, not every image had alt text. So, and we wanted alt text for every image in the Drupal site. So while the best way to create alt text is contextually, a task which content editors should handle, decent alt text is better than none. So here's how we handled, as developers, handled the challenge. It turned out to be tricky. As I mentioned, not every image had alt text in WordPress, and sometimes other fields like excerpt were empty strings. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to use alt text if it was available. And then if it wasn't, use excerpt, which is often a short version of content. Content was used mostly as the image's caption in WordPress. And if caption wasn't available, excerpt and alt text wasn't available, then we wanted to use the title of the image as a fail-safe. So no image went without alt text. So what we did is, first, we created an array with the values from the sources: alt, excerpt, content, and title. So that pulled all those values. Then we passed the array through the array filter function, which removed any empty values in the array. And finally, the last plugin in the chain was the current value, the first value in the array. Okay, so that's more or less the end of my presentation. The last slide is questions and conversation. So that was the end of our presentation on process plugins in a case study. And does anyone have a question or topic they would like to discuss? And do I stop sharing?
Let's keep sharing in case we want to show them something.
I have no way to know if anybody's...
I think our hosts.
Yes. Yeah. So there hasn't been any questions. Does anyone have any questions to ask?
Say hi. I don't know what's going on.
Anyone? Just give it a few minutes. If not, then I'll share the schedule.
Huh. Justin says that when he did this, absolutely zero of the images had alt text, and didn't realize that until afterwards. It's happened to us too, moving from a Drupal 7 site to a Drupal 8 site, finding that there was no alt text. And I mean, you know, it really should be handled by the content editors, and it's really a training issue at that point. But in this case, at least we found a way to, you know, overcome that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I am keeping, so WordHurt asks how much of this can be reused for other projects. Are most projects unique? So I think there's a lot of unique projects, but one of the things I learned from this one was for small, when you don't have much content in a content type, I'm not convinced that using migration tools is effective. For some of the content, for the authors where we only had 40 posts, I might have done those manually just to save time. But yeah, you can reuse things. We keep at Interpersonal Frequency, we have like a migrations library that we're working on, where we're keeping all the data and about things that worked for us, and all of my information from doing this project I'm keeping there. So yeah, you can reuse a lot.
I think in part it will depend on what plugins are used on the WordPress side. So some of the, you know, because there's a lot of different ways to build WordPress sites, right? And so that data might be serialized in different ways or embedded in different ways. And so, yeah, on any sites that y'all migrate that use those same plugins, I think a lot of this stuff will apply. But mostly it's about learning how to solve the problems. And then once you sort of get familiar with the patterns of how to extract the data and how to sort of massage it in different ways to solve the, you know, taking the stuff that WordPress creates and turning it into something Drupal can understand. I think it's more like a general toolbox of things that you can kind of figure out how to put it together and quicker each time.
So Olivier asks, any way to pass variables to the migration?
Henry,
did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to read out what Olivier said, but
okay, great.
You beat me to it, so.
Okay. Is there any way to, and the WordHurt says makes sense, thank you. Any way to pass variables to the migration, let's say image path, from the admin by a custom module? I'm using something like source constants, source folder equals source folder by a event subscriber.
I don't follow entirely, but I'm guessing that when you run the migration, you want to be able to kind of dynamically substitute some things based on maybe, yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, that was one of the reasons why, Jack, you mentioned in the migration group YAML sort of hard coding that path to the XML to a specific place in the repository that they could just update every time, because it is kind of hard to pass stuff dynamically into it. But that's a great idea if we have that need in the future. So via an event subscriber, being able to swap out, change out strings, constants that are used in the migration. We didn't have a need for that. Everything that we needed was pretty well hard coded. We were able to hard code in the constants in the YAML, but I'll definitely keep that in mind next time I'm doing it.
Okay, is there any other questions?
Thanks, Olivier.
And thank you. So if there isn't any other questions, I'll like share my screen and keep you updated about like the events happening after this session. I would like to say thank you to Jacqueline and Hawkeye for their presentation today. And so I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the Drupal Asheville.
And thank you so much, Henry, for moderating.
No problem. Thanks, guys.
All right. Ciao, y'all.